the competition started on the 9th of August this year on Singapore's National Day and will go on till the 6th of December 2020. A youth who loves to write or speak about your ideas, then the Conscious Youth Challenge may interest you. The ultimate objective of this challenge is to get our youth to be empathetic to others' needs and help facilitate the building of an inclusive society. How to empower an individual to understand and participate in building an inclusive society during this pandemic? That is the question posed to youth who are taking part in a competition named the Conscious Youth Challenge.
COVID-19 is an experience truly unique to the students of this generation, and their perspective on topics such as respect, responsibility, resilience, integrity, harmony, and care is one that is different and ever-changing.
Tell us more about the objective behind organizing this challenge.
The Conscious Youth Challenge COVID-19 invites all youth to share their experience, their responsibility towards society, harmony, integrity, and more importantly, the caring thoughts about society which can create an inclusive community. We are a group of mentors committed to establish a humanitarian movement under the Conscious Living Foundation, encouraging and empowering the sustainability.
A very good morning to one and all who have joined us from the East, and a warm good evening to all those who have joined this session from the West. My name is Gayatri, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar session on Conscious Conversation for Parents. Consciousness empowers sustainability. The Conscious Living Foundation was created to encourage living with more awareness, to wake up to the joy and positive significance of each moment. The members of the Conscious Living Foundation are a group of mentors committed to establishing a humanitarian movement, spreading self-awareness, exploring science and the source. The Foundation's activities create an awareness across the society in human transformation, serving the community, and holistic wellness. As one of its major ventures today, we have two very experienced and eminent speakers who will help parents understand how to empower kids to come out of failure and rejection, as well as how to deal with peer pressure and competition. Our first speaker for the day is Ms. Catherine Woodward Thomas. Ms. Catherine is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Conscious Uncoupling: 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After, and the national bestseller, Calling in the One: 7 Weeks to Attract the Love of Your Life. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a teacher to thousands from all corners of the world in her virtual and in-person learning communities. Catherine is also a featured teacher of Mind Valley, the online transformational educational giant. She also trains, credentials, and supervises people as certified conscious uncoupling coaches and as certified calling in the one coaches, and supports them to develop thriving private practices as love and relationship coaches. We welcome you, Ms. Catherine.
Thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ms. Melissa Maria. Ms. Melissa has over 25 years of experience in the field of education and administration in reputed schools in Mumbai, Oman, and Singapore. Presently, she is heading the GIIS Smart Campus in Singapore. Having attained a master's degree in history, a bachelor's degree in education, a certificate in educational leadership, as well as a certificate for counseling, Ms. Melissa has been responsible for the qualitative learning of the students, professional growth of teachers and staff, and positive engagement with the parents and school alumni. She has focused on working towards academic excellence, quality in education, green and sustainability initiatives, emphasizing in students' values of kindness, empathy, and service in the community. We welcome you, Ms. Melissa.
Thank you, Gayatri. Pleasure being here.
We also have with us Mr. Subhranshu Shekhar Das. Mr. Subhranshu is the founding mentor of the Conscious Living Foundation in Singapore. We would like to begin this session today by inviting Mr. Subhranshu to introduce to us the Conscious Youth Campaign. Over to you, Mr. Subhranshu.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Catherine, from city of San Francisco. Welcome, Melissa from Singapore, and our very kind host, Gayatri. I'm one of the founding mentor for the Conscious Living Foundation. The Conscious Living Foundation is committed to establishing a humanitarian movement through social programs spreading self-awareness. We work with corporates, communities, and individuals liberating consciousness and integrating transformation, service to the communities, and holistic wellness. So you can go through www.theconsciousliving.org. I would like to highlight a few minutes maybe about the campaign called the Conscious Youth Challenge 2020. The year 2020 has indeed been a transformative year of modern times, and COVID-19 has turned our lives upside down. Youths exposed to this pandemic and all the restrictions that came with it have faced many challenges. The effort they put in overcoming the challenges, ensuring that their learning continues smoothly, coming to terms with the lack of socializing and helping each other in times of distress must have been very enriching experience. So we are calling out the youth of today and the future leaders to share their viewpoints regarding the pandemic, how it has empowered them to accept challenges, find solutions, and be empathetic to others' needs, facilitating the building of an inclusive society. How to empower an individual to understand and participate in building an inclusive society during this pandemic is the subject where we encourage youth to talk about, to share with us. We want the youth to focus on areas such as respect, responsibility, resilience, integrity, harmony, and care when sharing the experience with us, with the community. The content for this could be gathered from any sources, their own experience, peers, families, and learning from schools and communities. Entry criteria would be anyone below 18 years studying in Singapore, and participants has to donate $10 to MediaCorp Enable Fund through giving.sg, which will go for specially challenged kids and their upliftment. And the participant has to write their perspective or a video clips of 60 seconds, and the best 10 participants will be selected through a community survey and given an opportunity to present their thoughts through an interactive workshops. And the best 3 entries will receive a cash prize of $1,000, $500, and $300 respectively. The recognitions will be given to all participants and their schools for their contributions and to nurturing the talent. So this is all about the Conscious Living Foundation and the objective to encourage kids and youth to talk about their experience. I will over to Gayatri for the rest of the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Subhranshu. We will now begin with the presentation by our speakers. For the benefit of the audience members, if you have any questions during the course of the presentation, kindly put them on the Q&A section of the webinar, which will help us address them. May I now invite Ms. Catherine for her presentation on how to empower your kids to uncouple from failure and rejection. Ms. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you so much. It is a delight to be here. And Gayatri, I cannot remember when I was introduced in such a lovely way. And I also want to thank my new friend, Sabranchu, who has invited me to participate. It's great to be here with you. This particular conversation is extremely dear to my heart. I have two daughters. One is 20 and one has just turned 18. And both of them have been diagnosed with learning disabilities, or I think we say the political correct way, learning differences. And those of you who have children who have these very kind of specific differences, these learning challenges, may relate that for me, it's been difficult really by way of the meaning that my daughters make of these particular differences that they have, that something is wrong with them, that they are inferior to other children, that there are parts of them that are unacceptable and that need to be hidden and create a sense of shame and often isolation. So that's what they tend to do. They tend to make it into almost an identity of failure right out of the gate. So, this is the meaning that our children are making of these challenges that they have. But even if you have, if you're fortunate to have a child who doesn't have these particular learning challenges, they may face challenges just by way of being teenagers and coming into the world and discovering who they are and where they fit into the world at large. And some of these decisions that they make about themselves are what we might call fixed decisions, decisions about identity that actually solidify a sense of self. And that identity then limits and even maybe defines what's possible for them as they move forward in life to become independent adults. So I understand firsthand kind of the urgency that we as parents can feel to make sure that our kids grow up feeling empowered to face any challenge that life has handed them, and to fundamentally, at the core of their being, to feel good about who they are, to have a positive image of themselves, a strong sense of self, that they are people who are worthy of being loved, that they are wanted by others, that they are liked, that their contributions are valuable, that they are capable of learning new things, and that they are worthy of respect. And to be so anchored into this sense of themselves that even in the face of failure, even in the face of rejection, that this fundamental core sense of self is not shaken. So even when my girlfriend or my boyfriend rejects me, I am still fundamentally a person who is worthy of being loved. Or even in the face of this failure that I'm experiencing right now, I am an intelligent person and I can figure this out. Even when someone whom I respect is disrespecting me, that I am still fundamentally a person who is worthy of respect, so that they are capable of relating to every failure, every mistake they make, every social rejection they experience simply as something that they are learning from, that they are growing in wisdom, that they are growing in their capacities, and it has nothing to do with a core sense of self, with who they are fundamentally, nothing to do with their power, nothing to do with their worthiness. So, to help our kids grow in this way, we want to help them develop a mindset that will allow them to relate to their own failures, their own limitations, their shortcomings, more as something that they're dealing with as a one time event or a specific thing, a specific challenge, as opposed to internalize these experiences as an identity, like I am a failure, I am a mistake, or I am inferior. I don't normally work directly with kids or with parents. My life is largely about serving adults and undoing the decisions that they made as teenagers, to help them to then even name, identify the decisions that they made about themselves, and to see how they then have cultivated and created patterns inside of those decisions, cultivated ways of showing up in life, like lowering their expectations or hiding who they really are inside of those decisions that they made. And so the opportunity just to talk today a bit about how we can even prevent our children from forming those identities and crystallizing them into this hard and fast decision that becomes fixed within them and then limits life moving forward, is really a great opportunity. So, the three things that I want to really share with you about how we can help our kids to not go there and make failure and rejection mean something that it's actually not is number one, is we want to redefine failure and mistakes. And even as parents, begin relating to our own failures, our own mistakes, and certainly the mistakes and failures of our kids as the springboard for success. Number two, we really want to encourage our kids to develop what we call a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. And number three, we want to help our kids get into the habit of making empowered meaning of the disappointments that they are experiencing. So I want to just unpack those a little bit more. That first one is about redefining failure. I think that all of us here are committed to success. We are successful people. We care about doing our best. That's why we're here, even learning together about how to be better parents or better educators. And so we want to instill this same drive in our children. And while this is wonderful to do, we also want to be actively cultivating an appreciation for failure, recognizing it as an opportunity to learn and creating an atmosphere where we can freely admit to and talk about our mistakes without making them mean anything negative about us. Because in doing that, we could actually limit our children's capacity for success later in life. So, failure is clearly always disappointing. Yet failure need not be a defining moment. And that's what we're guarding against. We're watching very closely for what our children are doing with failure. So it's not the failure that's a problem very often, it's our relationship to the failure that is challenging. So we want to relate to failure as something to be dealt with, as something we have the capacity to deal with and the capacity to learn from, because handled well, our failures and mistakes can actually become a springboard for great success. And we know that because countless discoveries have been made on the heels of failure. Penicillin was discovered by mistake, potato chips were discovered by mistake, pacemakers, microwave ovens, even chocolate chip cookies were made by mistakes. So someone set out to do one thing and they failed at that thing, but then look, they ended up creating something else that was quite wonderful. So we want to have more fun with failure. We want to see it as evidence that we're creative people, we're resilient people, resourceful people, people who are learning and growing, and not take it as evidence that we are deficient in some way. The bottom line, we want to relate to failure as an event, as an occurrence, and not as an identity, not as who we are. The second thing, this encouraging our kids to develop this growth mindset. In her book, which is titled Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, How We Can Learn to Fulfill Our Potential, was written by my dear friend, Dr. Carol Dweck, who is a professor at Stanford University. And she talks about the really big difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And in a fixed mindset, we see our own human qualities as something that's kind of set in stone. We're either smart or we are not smart. And if we fail, what gets revealed in that moment when we're in a fixed mindset is that we are not smart. So we're either likable or we're not likable. In a fixed mindset, when someone rejects us, what gets revealed is that we're not likable. So, what we want to do is, particularly with our teenagers whose very task is to form a social identity, to begin to see their place in the grand scheme of things, is to help our kids develop a mindset of growth about everything that's happening, particularly any failure, any rejection, any setback, any obstacle, any delay. So we want to keep our kids out of that shame-based fixed mindset, because if they're in a fixed mindset, they will go to shame. Inside of this perspective, they're going to start to maybe blame other people for their failures. They're going to start to hide who they really are. They're going to start to play smaller because they don't want to risk having a failure. You know, if you're not failing, your life is probably too small for you. So, inside of this fixed mindset, maybe someone's going to become a people pleaser and try and develop their personality in response to who they think other people will want them to be. So, inside of our growth mindset, we see intelligence as something that we can develop and grow. We see our social skills as something that we're always able to get better at. You know, right now, scientists are demonstrating that we human beings are much more capable of lifelong learning than we ever believed possible. And even our intelligence can increase over the course of our lifetimes. So, Professor Robert Sternberg from Cornell University writes that the number one factor in whether people achieve expertise in something is not some fixed prior ability, but purposeful engagement. So I think I stumbled over my words a bit. So what he says is that whether or not people achieve success in life is really not determined by some fixed prior ability that they were born with, but by purposeful engagement with life. So, in other words, it's not always the people who start out the smartest who stay the smartest in life. And what this means for us is that the views we adopt of ourselves profoundly impact the way we engage with our lives and therefore what's possible for us to create and to contribute. Again, we want to be aware of our kids' tendency to form a sense of self from their experience. And so, we as parents and as educators, when we see that happening, when we see false meaning being made, we want to encourage our kids to cultivate a growth mindset about that failure and intervene in how they're interpreting that experience, which leads to this final point of getting in the habit of making empowered meaning of our experiences. This has to do with how we relate to breakdowns, setbacks, obstacles, disappointments, and delays. And if we're in a fixed mindset, again, we're going to interpret those as information about who we are or who we're not, what we're never going to be able to do. And so you have a lot of power as a parent to intervene in that experience and also to begin relating yourself to obstacles, setbacks, and delays as something to learn from, as an opportunity for growth. So rather than relating to failure as information that is about someone's identity and who someone is and what their limitations are, we simply see it as feedback about what we need to do better next time. Maybe we need to study harder next time. Maybe we need to study differently, or maybe we need to get more support in order to understand this more deeply. So we want to cultivate a mindset about curiosity and cultivate, you know, an interest in what might we do better next time in order to grow and learn from this experience. So our job as parents is not just about teaching kids how to do math, but it's also teaching our kids how to make empowered meaning of whatever is happening. so that our kids can actually not have to try and start to hide who they are or dim down who they are or make their lives a little bit smaller so that they don't risk failure or even get into blaming others. We can certainly have a lot of reasons right now. Certainly, the pandemic's giving our kids a lot of things that they could point to about why they're not doing well that's outside of them. But we want to teach them about resilience in the face of whatever challenges life is presenting to us. And certainly, we have a lot of challenges right now. So, we want to take the shame out of it. And we want to normalize failure and mistakes as an important and valuable part of learning so that we can uncouple from the false meaning that our kids might be making about this and set them up to cultivate a mindset of growth, which is the best gift I think we can give our children.
Thank you very much, Ms. Catherine, for that very, very beautiful presentation. We have one question from the audience for you. We've spoken about how parents can help children deal with rejection. Would you be able to throw some light on how do we deal with rejection in a corporate career?
Oh, in a corporate career. I think rejection is one of the hardest things for all of us. Studies have shown, UCLA studies have shown that rejection actually triggers, social rejection triggers the same parts of the brain as if we were in physical pain. So I think the first thing that we have to do is recognize that it hurt and actually tend to our vulnerable selves in that moment and to normalize our own pain. It's never going to feel good to be rejected. And again, to notice if you want to move into making it mean something about yourself. If you want to go to a shame based place of, oh, somehow I'm not good enough. And to recognize that you are indeed worthy of making a mistake and that shows that you are a risk taker and a valuable team player, that you would even put yourself out there into an arena where you could be socially rejected, and to be able to cultivate a mindset of learning and to be able to go back with your dignity intact and simply ask more questions about it, about what is happening that you could improve upon and how might you be a better team player and what does the team actually need from you in this moment. And I think that level of resilience is what actually carries us through and allows us to realize our higher potential for contribution. So thank you for that gorgeous question.
Thank you very much, Ms. Catherine, for your response. May I request Mr. Subhranshu to run a poll for us now as we see the results of the poll. Mr. Subhranshu?
Yes, the poll is on the screen.
We are unable to see it.
Okay, give me a second. Could you see this now?
Yeah, it's seen here. Dealing with failure and rejection. Which are the following to deal with failure or rejection? Is it a repeat positive affirmation or everyone fails? You are not alone. The second question is how failure helps us uplifting our skills. Is it an opportunity to check your blind spot or burn away with pride and arrogance? All right, so I hope the audience members have taken the poll.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We have one more question for Ms. Catherine from the audience. Whether the gender of our child affects psychologically to determine the best treatment in handling rejection.
Oh goodness, that's a very interesting question from Agnes. You know, there's a cultural component to that, and I'm not up to date enough with where we are in Singapore. I know it's a very progressive culture. I would say in San Francisco, we're moving towards answering that as a no in some way. But because we're looking at making gender less important right now and really dealing with the individuals. That said, I do think that that gender is very important to our children, and that cultural norms are important to our children and where they fit in the grand scheme of things. So I think it depends upon the culture that the child is with, and if the norm for boys in Singapore is to be kind of rough and tough or sports minded or something like that, then you know, it's something to include in the social rejection. But all of this is really about making more empowered, meaning that even if there is social rejection, that your child is fundamentally worthy of respect. And that sometimes kids are a little different, and that's what they have a hard time with, particularly if there are stereotypes that are biased. Boys should be like this, girls should be like this, and your child is a little different than that. And so then you want to help them make empowered meaning that they are kind of a new evolution of kids, that everything, first of all, this thing about being different, everything new and wonderful in the world came into the world through someone who was a little bit different. Every rock and roll artist who's now well known was at one time an awkward kid who was different and had social rejection. Every kid who was, you know, kind of a dreamer off in the corner or just didn't fit into the stereotypes or wasn't learning at the same pace as the other kids. Those were the kids who created breakthroughs in science, who grew up to be extraordinary athletes. You know, they were a little different. So you have to help your kid to make empowered meaning. And I think that even though we can't spare our children the suffering of going through adolescence and how others treat them, it's very important how we treat them and how we hold them in our hearts, and to see the best in them and to see the highest possibilities for them will go a long way. I hope that's helpful.
Wonderful, Ms. Catherine. Thank you very much for that. With this, we have come to the end of the presentation by Ms. Catherine. I would now like to invite our next speaker, Ms. Melissa Maria, for her presentation on dealing with peer pressure and competition. Over to you, Ms. Melissa.
Thank you, Gayatri, for the warm welcome in the beginning and the introduction. A very good morning to all our listeners. Mr. Subhranshu Das, it's a pleasure to be part of this conversation this morning, and I'm grateful that you've invited me here to be aligned with your foundation. Catherine, that was a lovely sharing. Thank you so much for it. To all our listeners, my presentation is going to focus on two areas, which is peer pressure and competition. And for that, I will share my screen because I have a few slides on which I will be talking. Let me begin by sharing what my presentation will look at. I'm going to focus on 4 key points. One is understanding what peer pressure could mean in a school. Secondly, looking at competition among students. Thirdly, how can we collaborate with teachers as well as provide resources to parents to address both these issues? And fourthly, how can we engage students with appropriate resources? Research has shown that the most impressionable age for peer influence or pressure seems to be the middle school years. This is when a child is forming new friendships and identifying among those friends. Now, to begin with, what can peer pressure look like in a school? As I was going through the available literature online, I saw a apt piece that I thought I should share from a group called Talk It Out. They have shared 6 distinct ways in which peer pressure can be described. Firstly, spoken peer pressure. And what is that? Is when teenagers ask, suggest, persuade, or otherwise direct another to engage in a specific behavior. If this is done in a one-on-one environment, the recipient of the influence has a stronger chance of adhering to his or her own core values and beliefs. Let's come to the next one, unspoken pressure. This could take the form of fashion choices, personal interactions, or joining types of behavior, maybe clubs, cliques, teams. These could be due to lack of mental maturity to control impulses or simply lack of judgment. The third one that they speak about is direct peer pressure. And this type of peer pressure can be spoken or unspoken. It is normally behavior centric. Examples of these kind of behaviors would be when a teenager hands another teen an alcoholic drink, or makes a sexual advance, or looks at another student's paper during a test. Generally, a teen would need to make a decision there and there. The fourth is indirect peer pressure. Indirect peer pressure is subtle, but can still exert a strong influence on an impressionable young person. When a teen overhears a friend gossiping about another person and then reacts to the gossip, that can be termed as indirect peer pressure. You also have something called negative peer pressure. Asking a young teenager to engage in behavior that is against their moral code or family values is a type of negative peer pressure. Teens see the action of other teens with stronger personalities and are put in a position of following the leader or, of course, walking away. Teens find themselves engaging in behavior that goes against their beliefs simply because they want acceptance. And the last one, which is a very important one for us to understand, is positive peer pressure. This is a group dynamic. This can influence behaviors, and these are healthy, age appropriate, and socially acceptable. For instance, if a peer group wants to make good grades, a young teen can be positively influenced to study. Or if a popular friend wants to earn money and save to buy a car, a less outgoing teenager may also be influenced to get a job and open a savings account. Now, it is believed that parents can be the strongest influence in their child's life if they understand and are aware of the types of peer pressures their teenagers are facing. Supporting healthy friendships, modeling responsible behavior, and keeping an open, judgment-free family dialogue are 3 key components of maintaining positive parental influence on a teenager. And as I was going through this material, which I thought I'll share with you, I was also struck by another piece that is shared by Brett Lawson, who is a fellow of the American Psychological Association and professor of psychology at Florida Atlantic University. You know, he has defined peer pressure as an influence. And he says that you have explicit peer pressure and you can have implicit peer pressure. And he gives an example of a young man who starts middle school with long hair. And a couple of months in middle school, he gets his hair cut very short. Now, this could have been because somebody made fun of his long hair. And of course, that would be the explicit form of peer pressure. but it could also be very implicit. He could have wanted to fit in. He could have been eager to make new friends with other kids with short hair. He perhaps didn't want them to be put off by his long hair. He could have thought that this was some form of status, that people with short hair appear to have more status than people with long hair. We often don't really know exactly if it's one or the other. It is probably a combination of things. So when we think about peer pressure, we're really talking about influence to behave differently that is exerted by peers. There are some children who are susceptible to influence from anyone. That is to say, that whatever comes down, they're likely to follow. But it's also the case that some people are more influential. And so, if you're hanging around with people who tend to be particularly influential, you will look susceptible, even though you're not particularly susceptible. It just happens to be that you're hanging around with others who are highly influential. Let me now share a little bit about competition. As a school, it's essential for balance to be maintained between both the positive and negative impacts of competition among students. Josh Newbert has listed in his article ways competition can enhance learning, and I'll just share a few that he has shared. He believes that well-structured, consciously designed competitions actually foster collaboration and teamwork. Most team-based educational competitions require students to take on challenging tasks that require good communication, collaboration, and teamwork. The fact that they are striving to achieve such a challenging task together makes them work harder at understanding their specific skills and how to work well with one another. Secondly, he says to help students increase their respect for academics and interest in learning, it is important that they have heroes in the fields that they can look up to. Competitions are the strongest way to do this. We can learn from athletics on this, where we have very specific evaluation criteria on which our youth can easily see who is an expert in the field and who is not. Thirdly, he says that simply trying to incentivize a task that requires even a little mental effort with monetary reward is definitely not a good motivator. So what is? Recognizing that creating a challenging, purposeful process behind the task is always a good motivator. And for us in school, it's very good because educational competition in a K-12 setting, it provides students with a safe scenario in which they can practice these skills. Students faced with tough challenges can learn how to pick themselves up and try again when they fail. And I link this to what Catherine said about failure, how you can pick yourself and learn from there. They can learn through their participation that failing to achieve the best marks is not the end of the journey, but just a stepping stone and an amazing learning experience. I'm thrilled with all the examples that Miss Catherine gave, and it's so much for all our children at school. At the same time, all of us also know that competition can have some negative impact. We know that competition can easily lead to stress and anxiety, especially, of course, if it promotes academic competition between individual students. According to an article by Christine Tucker in The Classroom, says stress can force students to push back other interests and extracurricular activities, leading to an unbalanced life. If a competition does not provide kids with a goal that is attainable for everyone, the activity becomes unbalanced, with some jumping ahead and the others ending up left behind. This is the kind of competition that leads to anxiety and diminished desire to participate in related activities. Therefore, what I strongly believe and practice is that we teach students to look at themselves as their own competitors. We show them their past performance, we show them their present performance visually, and we allow them to set competitive goals for themselves to become better than their past and start looking for future. We also encourage team competitions because I feel that reduces anxiety and stress because it is less on a single individual. Now, the question is, how can teachers help manage pressure? Clara Prado, as part of her professional development during a Cambridge session, she gave the following tips to teachers. She says that the best weapon to fight any kind of peer pressure is self-confidence. When the student believes in his conviction and is sure about his personality and appearance, they don't seem to suffer the pressure in such a significant way. And I believe teachers in the class can work towards encouraging this confidence in children. Secondly, they can also allow students to take leadership roles in reporting and managing peer pressure. Thirdly, it's also important for teachers to show that they have a complete zero tolerance for any kind of such behavior that hurts or harms children. They need to create an environment where students are not afraid to fail and be ridiculed. I'm not going to repeat what Catherine has said, but she's already shared about failure and what environment we need to create, what kind of growth mindset we need to create in children. I think the last one is teachers can increase students' self-esteem and confidence by constantly focusing on their successes, not on their failures, but on their success. And of course, this is more of an attitude for teachers. Try not to point out the mistakes they are making. If a student makes a mistake in class, instead of pointing it, just repeat what they said, but do it correctly. For instance, if the student says, he is studying at the moment, just repeat the sentence correctly by saying, okay, he is studying at the moment. Give your student a chance to notice the mistake on his or her own without you having to point it out. Let's come to how school can work with parents. I think the school can take the initiative to connect with parents on a regular basis to collaboratively discuss strategies and highlight the topics around which peer pressure is being observed the most, and collaboratively come up with strategies to combat it. For example, if your teen feels uncomfortable going to parties where parents aren't present, we can definitely teach them how to politely decline a party invitation, saying no in a way that won't cause any hard feelings. If they are being pressured by friends to smoke cigarettes, they might just say, no, thanks, I'm not into it. I really feel sick even just being around smoke. Although we want our children to be polite, it's also very important to teach them the value of a firm no. And this is the right thing to do. When people learn to set their own limits, they'll feel more in control of themselves in many situations throughout their lives. It is also important for parents to allow their teens to make their day-to-day decisions for themselves. If parents are always deciding things for them, they send the message that their teens are incapable. The only way teens can truly develop their decision-making skills is to have a chance to practice putting them into action. As they make decisions themselves, they'll feel good about the choices they make and may be more likely to choose the right thing to do. I'll quote Professor Brett once again. He says, if parents can help children understand that our culture is full of influence attempts, And peers are just another set of forces that are vying for attention to shape our behavior. We start to talk about how we might resist this influence. He says it's much easier to resist an influence when you have thought about a strategy beforehand. For example, if a teen is going to a party and there's going to be somebody drinking there, certainly you want to ask your teen, what are the strategies if the person who was driving decides to drink? Or what are your strategies for not getting into the car? What are your strategies for finding a way home that won't involve driving with somebody who has been drinking? So, recognizing that there's influence out there, and it's not necessarily overt influence, there's going to be a lot of covert, implicit influence, and that influence is just the same as all other influence. And children need to be sensitive about that. It is strongly believed that parents can serve as a buffer against peer influence. We know that children who have good relations with their parents feel that they have less of a need to please their friends. Lastly, I come from a school setup, and I can share with the audience what we at GIS do, in order to encounter any kind of stress or discomfort our children would feel either due to pressure or due to competition. We have introduced a 24/7 GIS health line, and students have an access to this via WhatsApp. They can using confidential method, approach the counselor. This is a no questions asked forum. Anything that bothers them, they can just WhatsApp and our counselor gets to this. And our intent is mainly to build, again, resilience, build skills within them and their overall well-being. Secondly, we have our counselors on board, whether they are behavior counselors, well-being counselors, or even career counselors. We see most of our children, teenagers who are moving towards university have major stresses around what they're going to do. And of course, in this year, even more. So our career counselor is also there, just waiting for a call, and she's out to help. Another thing we've introduced is a robust teacher mentorship program. Every teacher of ours is assigned to a set of students for pastoral care and for anything that the child would need. And this is all outside academics, outside teaching them their subjects. It's basically building their skills to strengthen them, to make them strong individuals. And lastly, we also have a buddy program, which is run by our student council. And these are peers helping peers. Students can go up to their council members and anonymously share feedback or ask for help. And we feel that even the slightest kind of pressure that these children face, our council is empowered to help out, reach out. And they're also empowered to say that we are a school of zero tolerance for any kind of bullying or any kind of hurt or harm for students. To conclude, I would like to say that together we can help our children deal with their issues effectively and make them mentally and emotionally strong human beings as they prepare to take on the world in future. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Melissa, for that wonderful presentation. We have one question from you from the audience. What is the role of the community in dealing with rejection and competition?
That's a fantastic question. I think sometimes we are in our own world of our school. But more and more, I believe that what we train children from within the confines of the school, they have to experience the same thing outside. Otherwise, it's a futile exercise altogether. It's like a cocooned world inside the school, and then they're out in the open and they don't have it. So I think engaging in conversations with the community, making them see what our children are going through so that they understand what is the kind of stresses our children are facing and being there for them. Because at the end of it, I see the community as a huge resource. They're great people out there having so much to offer. If they are with us on our journey, in building our students for the future, I think our students will do so much more. Therefore, as a school, and also what Mr. Das is doing, I think he's engaging the community so that we are sensitizing everybody along this journey. And I think our students will do, teenagers and students will do fantastically well when they have that support as they walk out into the community.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ms. Melissa, for that wonderful answer. And as you rightly said, Mr. Subhranshu is also working on the same lines in order to engage students with the community. Thank you very much. You now have the poll on your screens, dear audience: peer pressure and undue competition. Which of the following is a type of peer pressure? Spoken peer pressure, direct peer pressure, positive peer pressure, or all of the above? Your second question is, which of the following is the indirect peer pressure? Is it overheard friends' gossip or heard about a friend's party and related activities? All right, I hope you have taken the poll. Ms. Melissa, there is another question to you from the audience. Schools could be a good place to build positive influence and characters for children. However, ironically, sexual harassment or other bad things can happen in schools, whether from friends or even by teachers. So related to that condition, what is your opinion about how, homeschooling method, and how effective is it?
Well, Agnes, I think you do have a point. We do hear of things happening in school that are not very desired. But at the same time, personally, I don't feel homeschooling is the answer. Because I think in a school setup, there's so much more happening in terms of the skills that are needed for the 21st century. You talk of communication, where you get an opportunity to share ideas. You talk of collaboration, teamwork, critical thinking. Possible that in a homeschooling setup, you may be able to give it. But at the end of it, we are interacting with people. The more people we interact with, we are able to actually cultivate and develop better. Now, in order to address the concern that you have raised, that something could be happening at school that is not very healthy for the children, I think it is the school's responsibility to set up, mechanisms and platforms that such things get reported, such things get addressed, and at the same time, we build strong resilient skill in our kids, that they learn to stand up to such things. At the end of it, I think it is important to empower each and every child. I can give you an example at our school. When we do have, these kind of cases, of course, we will address the perpetrator, but it is important to make the victim stronger so that he or she never has to go through something like this again. So our time and energy is also invested in getting our children to become stronger so that they very strongly, put a strong front against any such thing. So in some cases, homeschooling has helped, but personally, I am not of that belief that that is the answer. I hope I have answered you, Agnes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Melissa, for that wonderful answer. And I think with this, we've come to the end of the session. I would once again like to thank Ms. Catherine and Ms. Melissa for both your very enriching talk on conscious conversation and an interactive session with the audience too. And I'm sure they have really benefited from your valuable talk. I take this opportunity to thank you both for your time and effort in presenting these very delicate topics to us, and we are very grateful to you for that. I would also like to thank Mr. Subhranshu for this platform for an open conversation to help us understand the delicate bond between parents and their children and what role we as parents can play in their overall development. So we would like to sign off with this now. Thank you all and hope to hear from you again very soon.
Thank you, Gayatri. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.